How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good.
What's your questions?
I've heard that you've done a lot of South Asian studies and
Yes.
a lot of folk culture, which I'm really interested in, especially Madhubani painting or the
Okay.
Mithila painting. I'm doing an online advocacy project on
Okay.
child labor,
Okay.
and I just wanted to ask you a few questions on that.
Okay.
First of all, I wanted to ask you what inspired you or motivated you to study about South Asian culture and folk art culture.
I went to India kind of as a fluke when I was a junior at college.
Yeah.
So I was 19 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a long time ago. And it was the second ever study abroad program for American students in India. And I just never gave it up. I still go back 40 some years later.
Wow. How was the experience being in India?
It's way different now than it was then.
Could you elaborate on that?
When I first went, the part of in Delhi where Delhi University is probably an hour by horse cart from the main section downtown. And we used to take a Tonga horse-drawn carriage
Wow.
all the way there. Nowadays you can go by metro.
Yes.
So that kind of difference.
Yeah. While doing research in India, did you notice any instance of child labor?
The most vivid memory I have of child labor is when a friend took me to only 10 miles from where the village is where I normally do research. That was a carpet making village, and they had all these little tiny kids, 6, 7, 8 years old, that were tying knots to make fancy Indian carpets that sold for lots of money in the U.S. or somewhere, Europe.
When you saw them, how did you feel?
I was amazed by their ability and appalled that that's where they spent all their time.
Okay.
They were definitely from weavers and carpet makers don't make anything like the money that their products sell for.
Yes.
Right? There's huge markups along
Yes.
the way, and so they're probably earning not even $1 a day. But the carpet's selling for thousands in an American or European market.
Being from a developed country, what is your perspective on child labor?
Well, child labor in one sense is the same in India and the U.S., and that is if you live on a farm, you work on the farm. So a lot of the people I knew, because I lived in a rural village, so they were all farmers. The kids worked on the farm, they took care of the cattle, they did weeding, whatever, all the time. They, over time, more and more of them have gone to school, but there were still that. And American kids that live in rural areas do the same. So I didn't see as much in my everyday life of the child labor that you find in some other parts of India, like the carpet makers, or children who work in tea stalls in Delhi or on the road. There's a wonderful video that the South Asia Center owns that we've had for a long time, but it's still really true. It's about a little boy who works taxi. It helps with the mechanics of a taxi on one of the highways that links Pakistan and Afghanistan, one of those tall passes.
Mm-hmm.
And, but that's still all going on too. I mean, you can't go to a tea stall on one of the major highways in India without having seen child labor in action. So there's a difference between child labor in the sense of farming labor and child labor in the sense that we wouldn't let little kids work in a restaurant here, or at least we're not supposed to. I think probably some restaurants still have family members working that are relatively young.
Why is there a difference, and what makes the children in India or South Asia more prone to being in child labor than the children here in America?
Poverty.
Poverty.
It's just pure economics. If they're not able to either earn their own income or contribute to family income, they're not going to eat. I mean, it's purely poverty. It's not like they choose to do that. It's that they don't have much choice. Or, sometimes they get kicked out of their homes because there's too many children in the family. The family can't afford to keep them. A really interesting article. Actually, there's a book by this guy that came out this summer he followed he's from somewhere, I think in Bihar originally, and he followed his big brothers onto a train and ended up as an abandoned child in Calcutta. I mean, he wasn't abandoned per se, he got lost. And he ended up as a street child for a while, but then he got into an orphanage and got adopted to Australia. And when he was like 30 years old, he was able to find his original family.
Oh, wow.
Because of memories of what he remembered the town looking like, right? But, that happens because, there's a lot of street children. There's a lot of children that have to work every day in order to put money to food in their mouths. But the core basic issue is poverty. It would be the same thing in Central America as it is in India, right?
So do you think the parents have a big role to play in this?
Parents only have a role to play in that they have no access to income either. It's basically the economic system and combined with caste system, because a lot of the kids that are going to be in child labor are going to be from lower caste.
Yes.
So it's a combination of caste and class. And I mean, the word my students learned this week to talk about this is structural violence, right? Education, you say, oh, well, education is free in India, but it's not really free, because you still have to buy books, you still have to buy pens, you still have to have a notebook to write in, and you still have to have clothing that looks decent.
Yes.
So it's not free. And when I first went to rural India, even in the family I was staying in, which had a lot of land, but it was before the revolution, so it was still really, really hard. People had 2 sets of clothing. That would be it for the year. And at Diwali they get a new set, and at Holi they get a new set. And then they wear those for, a year, and then they get another new set. And whether it was women or kids, everybody had 2 sets of clothing. That was it. So it's really hard to look nice for school. And you can't afford soap to wash your hair, right? There's lots of things that make it impossible for people who are really poor.
And it's very sad to see the situation that they're living in.
Yeah.
According to you, from being from a developed country, what can one do to improve the situation or to stop the practice of child labor?
That's a good question. It's so hard because it's so ingrained into other economic systems. It's really hard to figure out what you can do from this distance. I suspect the best thing to do is to ally yourself with some non-government organization that's working for children's education, that would provide, if a kid is going to go to school and they're already doing child labor, then they have to bring in, not only do they have to have everything they need to go to school, they also need food, because they're going to starve otherwise if their parents are counting on them for income and food. So, making sure they're getting maybe 2 meals a day or something like that would be really key to being. It can't just be uniforms or tuition paid for. And the other thing that's really, really tricky with the India situation especially is that the government schools, which are free, are really bad.
Yes.
So nobody passes unless they get some extra help. So if it was a really good NGO that was working for children in child labor, they'd also have to not only make sure they made it to school every day, but they'd also have to make sure that they had some private tuitions, the Indian word, you know what that means, so that they could actually learn something and pass their courses. Because the teachers don't teach, they don't even show up half the time. So
yes. So the way to solve this problem would be like to getting in NGOs and
education. You can't just go in and say we're going to stop child labor. That doesn't work.
Yes.
You have to have something in place of the child labor, and you have to give the kids something that they're going to be able to value. One of the things I dislike about what a lot of NGOs in India do, for example, I know one that works in Jaipur. They teach them how to make jewelry. Teaching street children how to make jewelry isn't going to help them in the long run. They need to be able to learn to read and write, and they need to be able to have enough education, I mean by 10th class or 12th class at least, so that they can actually go get a job. It's a real job.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not talking about getting them through primary school. We're talking about getting them through 12th class at least.
Yes.
And giving them skills that are real skills in the modern world rather than, crafts. Everybody thinks they should go teach crafts.
Yes.
And that's not going to help them make a living.
Education and helping join.
Education that provides training for modern jobs.
Okay.
That would be my answer.
Okay. One last question. While you were in India, did you notice any difference between how a girl was treated than a boy?
Oh, lots. I've written about that a lot. Girls are, particularly in the north where I've lived, girls are consistently discriminated against in terms of education, in terms of getting to a doctor, in terms of food.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole variety of ways in which they are. And in the community where I do research, I've been doing census there since the late 60s. Fewer girl children survive to be 5 years of age now than they did even 20 years ago.
Yes.
So the discrimination against girls is continuing very strongly.
What can be done about that? Is there anything else? Or is it just the mindset of the society?
I don't know that you can do anything. The government tries to do things like outlaw. Nowadays, it used to be that you didn't take your girl child to the doctor. Now you abort her before she's born.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah,
But
it's very sad.
So we have feticide of girl children. To do that, I mean, you'd have to outlaw sonograms and you'd have to outlaw abortion. And India doesn't have a structure that allows you to successfully do that. I mean, I think sonograms are outlawed and to be used for feticide, but nobody pays any attention to that.
Okay.
India is a lightly ruled country in some ways.
Yes. And so do you think stricter laws and journalists, if they bring out the issue, will that help?
It will help a little bit. I don't think it will help very much because families don't let their daughters survive because they can't afford them.
Yes.
It's all poverty. Although a lot of the families that don't let daughters survive are not poor. It's also very much, especially in the rural areas, landowning farmers also don't let their daughters survive.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so it's just the mindset of the society and nothing can be done about it. Unless you change the mindset in some way.
You'd have to have some pretty major cultural campaigns. And even China, which is way better at having sort of invasive cultural campaigns, if I can use that term. I don't like them myself. I'd rather have the India system. But if you think about China, which tries to have, the one-child policy. I have a girl in freshman girl in one of my classes this semester from China, and she says, I have 2 sisters. And I said, how do you have 2 sisters in China? Because that's 3 children, right? And she says, we paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you could, in China, which is much more invasive in terms of people's personal lives than India is, they still can't win that argument. They also have discrimination against girl children very heavily, like India.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how you change the mindset. China hasn't done it, and if they can't do it, no one can.
Yes. Also, when you were doing your research, do you find children were forced to do something, or they were being kidnapped or abducted by anyone?
I didn't run across any of that.
You didn't?
No.
Okay.
I didn't run across any of that or any sex trafficking
that
I know that I ever heard about.
Okay, that's good. Thank you for your time.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much for all the information.
You're welcome. Good luck.
Thank you.